Hello and welcome. This is Wilrens for Create a Learning Site, the place to go deeper in your understanding of the Bible. The book of Job challenges modern readers. It feels long-winded and repetitive. Can I get the one tweet per chapter version of this exchange? Many might ask today. And then, to make it worse, after a seemingly endless and to many of us boring debate, God finally answers Job, or does he? What is the answer? By the way, that one tweet per chapter version of this exchange exists. I asked ChatGPT to make it for me or for us. If you want to have a look, go to the website at wilrens.org. Going by some translations, God's response to Job finishes with an oration on the hippopotamus and the crocodile, a lecture in biology that seems questionable since several details do not fit these two animals. And how on earth does this help Job? Eric Ortlund addresses this question in Piercing Leviathan, God's defeat of evil in the book of Job. He repeatedly points out that Job responds to God's reply with worship and repentance in chapter 42. So it must have been a pretty good answer. The key question then is what God's answer really communicates and why it was so persuasive and life-saving to Job. Notably, the book's subtitle speaks not of explaining evil or defending God's justice, but of evil's defeat, a bold claim and something much more practical. Ortlund summarizes the aim of his book as follows, quotation, "Many commentaries follow the course of the debate in chapters 3 through 37 in generally the same way, but when it comes to Yahweh's two speeches, widely differing and incompatible interpretations are given, most of which are unsatisfying, because they cannot explain how the descriptions of Behemoth and Leviathan" Ortlund prefers to leave the Hebrew terms untranslated, there's no crocodile here, count as a defense of God's justice, nor how this defense moves Job from defiant criticism to abject worship. Ortlund's solution or answer is based on understanding Behemoth and Leviathan within the cultural framework of the ancient Near East as he puts it, symbols of cosmic chaos and evil. This way, so Ortlund, God assures Job that he is more intimately acquainted with the magnitude and malignity of the evil at work in this world than Job ever could be. And in this way also, so Ortlund, God promises Job that he will one day defeat evil. Now, he does not explain to Job why he allowed this ordeal. He doesn't offer an apology, but implicitly God asked Job, through the Leviathan speech at the end, to trust him in his way of running the world, allowing evil some real but limited agency and not forever. And so in this way, Ortlund claims God defends the justice of the way he administrates creation, and that is an administration that sometimes allows terrible suffering. And in response to all this, Job worships. There are two responses by God at the end of the book of Job. The first one's in chapter 38 and 39. After a torturously long silence to Job, filled with equally torturously long speeches to many of us, God finally speaks from a storm. And already this is significant. In the ancient Near East context, the storm evokes warfare. God appears ready for action, much like the storm god Baal facing the sea god Yam or Moth, the god of death in Canaanite mythology. We're back in that world. God confronts chaos and establishes order while still allowing a measure of disorder in his world. We even catch a glimpse in Job 38 that God is not completely passive toward evil or the wicked, but that there is his hidden action in history against injustice. The wicked are shaken out. Their uplifted arm is broken. Beginning in Job 38, verse 39, then, God presents to Job a parade of wild animals in 5 pairs: lion and raven, goat and doe, wild donkey and wild ox, ostrich and warhorse, hawk and eagle. 10 in total, a full number. These creatures live on the edge of order. They live in wild and arid spaces where humans cannot live. Except for the horse, which is included as an animal of war, an environment of chaos, none of them are domesticated. They inhabit a realm beyond human control and morality, yet God cares for them and provides for their survival. Even this chaotic edge of creation is under his rule, and his care for it reflects his goodness. Now, here's an interesting parallel from the world of the ancient Near East. Assyrian kings like Sennacherib and Ashurbanipal are not infrequently portrayed as hunting lions or wild donkeys on the Assyrian reliefs from their palaces. And this is not a matter of royal entertainment, but it conveys a serious message. It shows that the king is at work to protect his realm and restrain the creatures of the wild, the forces of chaos at the edge. However, sometimes the king is portrayed feeding a lion, showing he's also providing for and controlling the wild. Likewise, God cares for the creatures of the wild and provides for them. So why does this move Job to withdraw his complaint? It's not as if God suddenly proves his wisdom or power. Job never doubted those. Instead, God invites Job to trust his wisdom in how he governs creation, including its pockets and edges of chaos and evil. Now, Ortlund identifies 3 factors that lead Job to surrender. First, there are the limits of Job's knowledge. As Ortlund puts it, the first is that God's world is much vaster, more complex, and more mysterious than Job has recognized. He does not know enough to make sweeping generalizations. And second, there is God's goodness. In Ortlund's words, second, Job is meant to conclude from chapters 38-39 that there is a great deal of order and goodness in God's world and how it is administered. And then third, there's the limited existence of evil. Ortlund again, a third implication from God's first speech is that his plan for creation does allow some evil and chaos within certain limits, but that this allowance does not mean God is an amoral, uncaring tyrant. The decision God has made about how this world will be governed is to allow pockets of disorder to exist within a much larger order, without immediately annihilating every threatening or violent aspect of creation. When we come to God's second speech, we find that Job's reaction at the end is even stronger. So what does the discourse on Behemoth and Leviathan add? And who or what are these 2 beings? We're not dealing with a crocodile and a hippopotamus. In Job 40, verse 17, this first creature is described having a tail like a cedar beam that does not match the hippo. And no real animal breathes fire as Leviathan does. The crocodile can be tamed, unlike Leviathan, and does not dwell in the open sea. And why add 2 more animals after we already had a pretty full zoo in the 2 preceding chapters? Instead, we meet creatures, they are still creatures, that symbolize chaos and evil, the dark and destructive forces of nature. Leviathan, the twisting serpent of Isaiah 27. Well, that's a well-known chaos monster in Canaanite and other mythology of the time. The Hebrew word behemoth literally means animals. It's a plural form, but here it's used as a singular name for a unique, untamable creature. Ortlund nicknames it super beast. There are parallels to Behemoth in ancient mythology as well as with Leviathan, even if not as many. The scene in Job is reminiscent of an episode in the ancient Gilgamesh epos. At one point, the goddess Ishtar gets angry with Gilgamesh and sends the bull of heaven against him and his friend, and the friend kills it. In Egyptian mythology, Horus fights and overcomes Seth to become king. Seth is sometimes portrayed in the form of a hippopotamus. In speaking of these unusual creatures, God is not evading the issue of Job's complaint about divine justice. Job 40 verse 8 makes this explicit. Will you put me in the wrong? God asks. Will you condemn me? The conundrum of God's justice is the subject of what follows. What will God do about these forces of darkness, or violence and destruction? The opening context of Job 40 in verse 8 to 13 evokes divine warfare and theophany. That is, a dramatic appearance, as for instance in Habakkuk 3 or God coming to Mount Sinai. There are references to God's arm, to his voice of thunder, to his glory, and to the treading down of the wicked in verse 12. God is not indifferent or passive toward evil. The wicked will fall. And it is in this context that Behemoth is introduced in verse 15. Verses 19 and 24 suggest only God can confront it. And again, God is not simply giving a lecture. He is declaring his readiness for battle in his time. Job 41 has two parts. The first 11 verses, we learn that no human can hope to capture or conquer Leviathan. The point of this first part becomes clear in verse 10 and 11. If no one can master Leviathan, how much less can anyone contend with God? And the second part, beginning in verse 12, well, here we are not reading a static description of Leviathan. It's kind of easy to miss, but it is a description of battle. Think of the Babylonian creation myth, for instance, and Numa Elish, in which Marduk and the other gods fight the sea monster Tiamat. A biblical parallel appears in, for instance, Psalm 18, where God comes to David's rescue, spewing fire and smoke. In the portrayal here, Leviathan's defenses are impenetrable. There is no opening in its armor, and human weapons fail. Even the mighty are afraid, we're told in verse 25. The Hebrew word here is Elim, which typically refers to divine beings, not human heroes. We hear an echo of the gods trembling before Tiamat in Enuma Elish. If heaven's warriors recoil from creation's greatest threat, then surely human efforts are hopeless. And yet, Leviathan is still a creature, and its maker does not fear it. More than that, God alone can and will subdue this destructive force. In Job's day, in part, one day, so we may assume, in full. Let's take a final leap. The two beasts at the end of Job, one land animal and one sea animal, may have inspired Revelation chapter 13, which also portrays two beasts, one from the sea and the second from the land. Revelation focuses on a different expression of evil, not simply nature's destructive forces or individual wickedness, but systemic, human-embedded evil. This Leviathan in Revelation emerges from the world of humans. Where Job assures us that God can handle the monsters of chaos, Revelation assures us he can handle the beasts of history as well. Both books announce the same hope. God is not overwhelmed by evil, and one day he will bring it to an end.
The show will be starting in just a few moments. Thank you for your patience. The show will be starting in just a few moments.